Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Bastion Roundtable. We've got a wonderful guest here. We've got Simon Rowe, Supply Chain Transformation and Ops Lead for ANZ from Kimberly Clark. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Tony, great to be with you, and thanks for having me.
No, it's going to be an exciting but also interesting conversation. So, we've over the last couple of years here in Australia and globally experienced a number of different shortages and supply issues across supply chain, across a number of different categories. I think here, certainly here in Oz, the category of toilet paper, which was obviously relevant to Simon, but things like meat and vegetables, building materials, finished goods. It's been an interesting time to kind of summarize where we're at in terms of supply chain and some of the challenges we've had, but and also the variability and the predictability and the uncertainty that we're currently living in. It's kind of created a marketplace that's really challenging for us as consumers, but also for supply chain leaders like Simon to kind of understand where we are on a day-to-day basis. And so for today, why I was really interested to bring Simon on board were two kind of main concepts. One, the first being what was it like to deal with this toilet paper crisis and shortage, and just the general kind of lessons learned from what was that like. And then obviously so many benefits that we can bring to the market and to consumers and retailers, and how we work through that as well. So I think, so let's just jump into it here. And so let's start off talking about this toilet paper shortage that we went through, and I think it affected everyone as well. So we'd love to hear from you, Simon. What was it like, and what was the day-to-day really?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tony, and a couple of things spring to mind. And hearing you talk earlier around the last couple of years, I can't believe where the time's gone. To be honest, it's just been a complete and utter blur in terms of all the things we had to do to make sure Australians got toilet paper and nappies, for that matter, over the last couple of years to keep Australia stocked. So I think, firstly, for me, outside the psychology of like why toilet paper, and I still kind of get that kind of why toilet paper. It's really been about resilience and agility and responsiveness, and turning that into action, right? And I think nearly every day we've walked into another problem. We had to pivot the strategy and pivot the day-to-day tactical execution of our supply chain to make sure that we could scale up as much as we can and meet every challenge along the way to, as I said, make sure we kept Australia in stock to the best we can. I think secondly for that, I really think over the last couple of years, the dimensions have changed and the rules have been rewritten. I think a lot of organizations have been caught out by this. Yep. I think they're going to have to make up ground quickly, because I think the rules of the game have changed. I think there's going to be a lot of transformation activities, particularly in the space, to change that and catch up. Otherwise, they risk being left behind even further than they are today coming out of this thing.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And just in terms of, we certainly looked at how day-to-day was and some of the lessons learned, but just in the thick of things and the firefighting issues, as a supply chain professional, like, it'd be really difficult to cope with, and it'd be insightful for us from an audience perspective. What was it really like day to day? I mean, you'd see on the news reports on, we saw, actually, I remember seeing some videos on the news. I was seeing on the news that there were these sheds full of toilet paper, but in the retailers, there was nothing on the shelf, right? So kind of that continuity and understanding that there was actual supply in the country, but in the retailers, there was nothing there. So what was that like, just kind of trying to deal with how do you cope with that? And also, I'm sure the retailers weren't as understanding as they like to be sometimes. So can you just give us a bit more insight as to how that was essentially what that was like?
And there's a couple of points to that one, Tony. So I'll kind of address the what was it like piece, and then maybe help unpack that why it happened question that I heard in there as well. So what was it like? Dynamic and evolving is the only way I can describe what's happened and what has continued to happen, even as late as the last Omicron wave at Christmas is still with us. But at KC, we're very fortunate. The last 3 or 4 years, we've done a lot of structural transformation and put a lot of big boulders in place that really helped us respond and move fast to the changing conditions.
Sure.
I think things that we took really early in the piece around responding to panic buying and turning from an FMCG that delivers to the Coles and Woolies of the world to doing direct store fulfillment is one of those examples of where we completely changed our skin and did something completely different to try to meet the demand and changing landscape that was unfolding.
Yep.
We ramped up production and did all the things that, you read the supply chain 101 textbooks that tell you to do, and, simplifying your range, ramping volume, all those sort of things that are really hard in typical times to do. We did it on a kind of a 5-cent coin, and we're able to ramp up production and meet record volumes year after year. And for the last 3 years at Kimberly-Clark, we've done that across all our categories. Despite all the challenges, we've hit more and more volume coming out of our mills and from overseas supply points every year. And that comes right to the heart of what it felt like this year to be, or 2021 actually, to be awarded Coles Supply Chain Partner of the Year because of our efforts. And I think a lot of the things we did to get that kind of just talk through, being customer centric and really doing everything we can to get toilet paper out the door and nappies into mums and dads' hands.
Yeah, sure. And just to go back, Simon, sorry, obviously, there's just kind of the toilet paper was such a key specific category that people were talking about, rightly or wrongly, given some of the product availability on shelves. But were there any other kind of Kimberly-Clark products that you guys had to work through, or some of the challenges that weren't maybe as front and center in the media, but just in the back end, that you had any kind of similar constraints or unusual situations dealing with over the last couple of years?
You bet, Tony. I mean, we import a lot of our BCC or childcare range from overseas, and when the absenteeism and infections started to climb in the major shipping centres of the world, container constraints impacted us materially. We saw the price of a spot rate of container jump 8-fold.
Yep.
And luckily, being Kimberly-Clark, we're able to trade our way through that and keep bringing stock down. But that was a daily proposition around prioritizing, streamlining, and getting what we need down here. And even the other end of our business, our professional business that services more of the B2B space. We had factories being nationalized to stockpile PPE and things like that to deal with. So really kind of broad end of the spectrum, from constraints around capacity to geopolitical moves impacting supply chain. It was never a dull moment, and still kind of hangs around.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of draws to, what with the second part, it's certainly, as I said, just even from not even the supply chain, not being in the supply chain ecosystem, but just generally as a consumer, the toilet paper category was interesting just because, there's so many times people have said you walk into the store and they weren't there. And obviously we're kind of coming out of COVID now, especially from a supply chain perspective for certain categories. I think there are still a number that are being impacted, and you add other kind of geopolitical issues like the war. I think even in the last couple of days, you're starting to see a lot more content and discussion points around specific categories and raw materials that are going to be further impacted because of the war. But do you see any kind of future trends that, from a supply issue, that Australia needs to be aware of moving forward? Like, is there anything else you as a, because you've got that consulting background as well, you've got the operational mix as well. Can you kind of foresee any future challenges that we as supply chains in Oz that we're going to have to deal with over the next couple of years? Yeah,
look, I think speaking from a personal experience, kind of having that transformation out of KC, as I said before, moving into this thing, we were fortunate. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting and set ourselves up on a platform to kind of go from there, which is just fortuitous more than anything, because no one's this coming. But I think from a supply chain strategy perspective, what we've done and what we're going to introduce to our new thinking, and perhaps what I can leave with some of the listeners out there as well, is there's going to be a reset in terms of the dimensions of supply chain management. There's not three anymore in my mind around working capital, cost, and service. Now there's this responsiveness and agility. And having that responsiveness, agility built into your plans, and that might mean, some elements of latent capacity is okay. Higher levels of stage stock might be okay. War gaming and scenario planning, future disruptions are going to be, a more and more important role of the supply chain executive going forward, to make sure that when and if this happens again, there's a playbook to go to, and there's a set of things that happens to make the organisation either trade through it the best they can, or beat off competitors the best they can during the constraints.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I mean, again, this is always, the dynamics are always going to change. I think it's naive to say that there weren't challenges 10, 15. There's always been different challenges. I think now with some of, I guess the fragility and the resiliency of supply chain are major themes that people are talking about now. I think, and the dynamics of what the model of supply chain really needs to adjust. Where I think we're probably in the for about a 15 year period, it was kind of consistent, lowest cost to serve. Yeah, and I think it's been shined on now that model just isn't going to work moving forward, especially with some of the tensions in the world at the moment. I did want to ask you, and obviously it's relevant to us here at Bastion Consulting, around talent. Either what Kimberly Clark went through the last couple of years in terms of talent and staffing and labor issues, or can you see any potential further constraints? And I ask this question with most people who come on because it's interesting to see from a supply chain leadership perspective how they view the challenges with talent as opposed to us from the recruitment side. Obviously, we've got our own kind of views on what that's going to look like. But for you, do you see any further challenges or constraints, or just generally in terms of talent, what do you see coming up in the next couple of years?
And so that's a really great point, and something I sit down and philosophize and think about quite a bit. It keeps me up at night, to be honest with you. I think the two things I'm thinking about specifically around supply chain talent is, like, over the last couple of years, the longer term issues around the talent piece for me have been around the loss of kind of that onboarding of new talent, new entrants to the sector. The last couple of years, we've had lots of people graduate university, lots of people come into the workforce that haven't walked supply chains, haven't physically walked them, haven't physically seen operations, haven't physically got a handle of how it all comes together. And for me, if you miss that fundamental bit in your career, it's hard to make up. So I think the onus is going to be on organizations and senior executives in organizations to make sure that's acknowledged and not just move new entrants straight into positions that they don't understand and put unrealistic expectations. But I think the need for structured training and go and see type excursions, for want of a better word, to operations and supply chain is going to be important to bring these new entrants that are very capable with data analytics skills up to speed around how it all hangs together and works from a pure play perspective in terms of supply chain.
Yeah, look, I mean that's very consistent from what we've been saying. We've been talking quite a bit. I mean, lately we've been talking about the gap, the transfer of IP specifically in a warehousing or operation, or the day-to-day perspective in supply chain. The analytics, I think, are probably going to be incredibly strong moving forward. Anything to do with solutioning and like the concept, the theoretical elements are going to be strong, but I do see a gap, and it's an unwillingness to go do the work on the floor, the work in the shop, work in operations and logistics, because it's not as sexy. The younger generations certainly aren't as interested. They're more interested in the analytics and the AI and the blockchain and all that kind of stuff, the technology element, which is all great stuff. But I do see a problem coming up where there's just not going to have that knowledge of what the day-to-day is like in the shed, and then the willingness to understand what it's like, and then the empathy. And there's all layers to that to understand how to make that more efficient. I think that's going to be a challenge. So it's actually, I'm not to say I told you so to people, but it's refreshing to hear that supply chain leaders see it the same way I do, because I do think we're going to have a problem in the next 5 to 10 years, but people just aren't going to want to work in that operational element.
Yeah, we're going to rely more on you, people like you, Tony, to help bring that talent to us to get them up to speed and really make sure we're set up for the future of supply chain in Australia. But I think the second one for that, everyone talks about this war for talent, like it's real, right? It's really real. As I said before, supply chain professionals, but potentially before COVID, back of the house, and we're saying this for a long time, back of the house type operations and folk hiding behind the daily work and not often out in front of the organisation. But geez, over the last couple of years, we've really led the organisation in terms of navigating through the boulders and really setting the direction around what to do and what to do next and why. And I don't think that's going away. I think now we've really got to sit at the table. And if you hear our Chief Supply Chain Officer, Shane Azzi, talk this way as well, we've got to sit at the table, and the organisation's really starting to understand that under that layer of the corporate board table, everything else kind of under there is impacting and driven by supply chain, to a large degree around what you're doing from a network infrastructure perspective, service level perspective, and cost, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, look, it's a great point. So Well, look, I think that's that's a great transition for us to wrap it up here, Simon. Again, I really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk to us today. I know the elements of toilet paper are interesting, just purely from what it was like dealing with all that a couple of years ago. Thankfully, we're in a much better position now with that specific topic, but obviously still a lot of challenges moving forward in supply chain for professionals. So look, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to speak with us, and I'm sure all the audience will love it as well. If you've got any questions or comments for Simon, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tony.
Cheers.
Bye.